You don't use the word crusade, number one, in any context right now. It's too fraught. And the week after a pilot is burned alive and a video shown, you don't lean over backwards to be philosophical about the sins of the fathers. You have to deal with the issue that's in front of you, or don't deal with it at all.
There are a lot of politicians, conservative politicians, who invoke religion when talking about fighting
But he's the president.
ISIS.
He's the president, and you can't really go back to 1095.
You think he made a mistake?
I do, because it's so out of context, and it is so much in passing. If you're giving a major speech about theology, perhaps, but this is the prayer breakfast, and remember, you know, the context of that is very limited.
All right, even Andrea Mitchell of NBC News is out there strongly condemning the president's remarks last week at the National Prayer Breakfast. Joining me now is someone who is also outraged by those remarks, Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal. Governor, I actually liked your statement you put out. You said it's nice of the president to try and give us a history lesson. Today, however, the issue is right in front of his nose in the here and now, and that's terrorism of radical Islam, the assassination of journalists, the beheading and burning alive of captives. You know, we'll keep an eye out for runaway Christians, but it'd be nice if he would face the reality of the situation today. Why do you think he steadfastly refuses to acknowledge radical Islam?
Sean, first of all, that's exactly right. Look, I've got a deal for the White House. You and I will keep an eye out for runaway Christians. We'll make sure medieval Christianity doesn't make a comeback. If he, as President of the United States, would protect us from radical Islamic terrorism. You know, Sean, this is a president, he doesn't like to use those words. He doesn't like to call it terrorism. He sometimes tries to treat it as a criminal act. He certainly doesn't like to say radical Islamic. There's a politically correct crowd that jumps on you when you say that. You've been the victim of this. I've certainly been attacked. When I gave a speech in London talking about the threats and the dangers posed by radical Islamic terrorism, called on Muslim leaders to condemn individuals, say loudly and clearly they were not martyrs, they were not going to enjoy a reward in the afterlife, I was quickly called a racist by the left. I was called anti-Muslim. That's not true. It's simply recognizing the danger, the problem we face. And by the way, here in the West, we better insist on assimilation and integration for those who want to come live in our country. I think he's trying to be politically correct. You know, you've heard the left say, if you say the things like you and I say, if we call it what it is, that's somehow racist or culturally arrogant or colonial. I think it's just common sense.
All right, well, let's talk about the history of this, about the Crusades, which started in the first crusade began in 1095, but that was 460 years after the first Christian city was overrun by Muslim armies, preceded by Jerusalem being sacked, preceded by Egypt, preceded by Italy and Constantinople, and preceded by Spain and France and even Rome itself that were attacked, and these were Christian enclaves and historical sites that had been attacked by Muslim armies, right? Isn't that a fact? Whether you agree with the Crusades or not.
Look, Sean, the reality is, think how absurd this is. So now the president's trying to get people to debate the Crusades hundreds of years later.
Absurd. But he's wrong, factually. I mean, the analogy's off, I mean.
Well, and part of the problem is, regardless of his analogy, it's this moral equivalence of the left. It's this mush. It's this moral relativism. This is a president, Sean, but there's a greater problem here. This is a president who won't proudly proclaim American exceptionalism. Maybe the first president ever who truly doesn't believe in that. Look at his foreign policy. Doesn't believe America as a force for good. It doesn't seem. Seems like instead he believes in multilateralism as a goal, not a tactic. He allows foreign capitals to have veto power over foreign policy. And so this is part of what happens, and what I worry about is if we don't teach American exceptionalism to the next generation, these are the kinds of leaders we're going to have. We don't insist on English. We don't insist on people coming here becoming Americans, not hyphenated Americans, not creating their own subcultures where they use our freedoms to overthrow our freedoms. This is what I worry about. Right. And look, we don't discriminate against anybody.
So he talked about terrible deeds done in the name of Christ. Do you think he would ever say the words terrible deeds done in the name of Muhammad? And if not, why not?
I wish he would. You know, the threat we face today are radical Islamic terrorists. And he seems to go out of his way to say they're not terrorists, to say they're not radical Muslims. Sean, Islam's got a problem. And the reality is, I don't think, I certainly don't believe, I don't hope that a majority of Muslims agree with these terrorists. But we've got to recognize the problem for what it is. And that's why it's up to individual Muslim leaders to denounce the individuals, not just the acts of violence. And so you're right. He refuses to use those words. And he was speaking at a national prayer breakfast. What was even more jarring, you look at the context, you look at where he was speaking, He had to reach back into history hundreds of years ago, as you said, to try to talk about, well, look at all the bad things Christians have done. It just, to me, he's supposed to be our leader.
You were in Washington today, and I know you were talking about getting the federal government out of the states and education. A lot of people believe now you're really gearing up for a run for the presidency. So where do you stand in that process?
Well, Sean, we're thinking about it. Anybody that's thinking about running for president needs to think about the issues and present detailed ideas of how do we move the country forward. Look, we got to get rid of Common Core. It's just the latest example of the federal government overreaching in the local classrooms. We need to enact parent choice. If there are Republicans or candidates who believe in a bigger role for the federal government, they should make that case, and we should have that debate, and voters should get to decide. But this is an important election. Anybody thinking about running needs to be thinking about the issues. How do we lead our country forward? How do we change the direction from where our president is taking us to get back on the right track to preserve the American dream for our kids?
Our governor will continue to follow and see where you come up in that decision. Thanks so much for being with us.